to the Education and Development Career Panel number 1. This is the first of 2 career panels that we're putting on as part of the CEID community at Moray House. My name's Will Smith. I'm the coordinator for the Comparative Education and International Development, or CEID community here at Moray House. And today we're bringing in panelists that are working in international and regional organizations and INGOs to share their experiences on their current work as well as their career path. So it's a great opportunity to hear from them, but also ask questions of our panelists. The aim here is really to expose students, so my own students as well as many others, and other interested individuals with a wide variety of work in education and development that's being done by those currently positioned in international or regional organizations. And the hope here is that we're providing a space for panelists to share their career journey, advice, and the challenges that they've faced, as well as a space for students and other interested individuals to ask questions related to current occupation and career path to those experts that are working in the field. So as we're going along, I invite you, if you're going to share on social media, please do add or tweet at us at Moray House CEID. You see that at the bottom of this slide. This is a fairly basic structure. So each panelist, after they're introduced, will have about 7 minutes to share. They've been asked to share a little bit about what they're currently working on, so their current position, as well as kind of a highlights edition of some of their career journey. So we have a wide variety of experience on the panel, and some could spend these whole hour and a half talking about their career journey. So I've asked them to give us the highlights version. And then once we're done there, it's really up to you on what questions you want to do, where you want the conversation to go. So I hope is that we have at least a half an hour at the end of this, hopefully a little more, to have an open question and answer and really an informal conversation with our panelists. Introducing our panelists today. I'm really excited. This feels a little bit like a reunion, which is nice, especially since I'm not able to see many of these colleagues, given the face-to-face has been shut down. So it's great. I really appreciate all of our panelists for joining us today. Be going in order down the left column first. So I'll just go over who we have on the panel before I introduce individuals one at a time. So on our panel, we have Tanvir Muntasim, who is currently an education specialist in civil society and mutual accountability for the Global Partnership for Education. We also have Heather Simpson, who's the Chief Program Officer at Room to Read. Pablo Frazier, who's a TALIS analyst at the OECD. Nihan Koselesci Blanchy, who's an education economist, currently at the European Investment Bank. Boaz Waruku, who is a program manager at the African Network Campaign on Education for All, or ANCEFA. And finally, Alexandra Draxler, who's the senior advisor with NORAG, but formerly has lots of good experiences at UNESCO. So thank you all for being here. Once again, you'll have about 7 minutes to share what you're currently working on and a little bit about how you got there, a little bit on your career journey. So I'd like to start by inviting Tanvir up to just share his current position and journey.
Many thanks, Will, and it's wonderful to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Currently, I work for Global Partnership for Education, as Will has mentioned, which is a multi-stakeholder partnership and funding mechanism for education in more than 70 countries. We work mostly with governments and international agencies, but we have partnerships with civil society as well. And in my current role as a specialist in civil society and mutual accountability, I manage Education Out Loud, which is a funding mechanism for civil society advocacy in more than 50 countries. I'm based in Washington, but I'm originally from Bangladesh in South Asia. So it has been literally a long journey for me from where I started. As part of Global Partnership for Education, I have the opportunity to work with really exciting civil society organizations around the world who are working to emphasize strong accountability in education sector dialogue, and also making sure that the voice of the marginalized community reaches the higher echelons of policymaking arena. So it's quite exciting for me. And I mean, I have reached this role after exactly 20 years in the sector. So it's like a 2-decade anniversary for me, starting off in 2001, when I started in Bangladesh, managing a project on education budget literacy, analysis, and advocacy. And I mean, and it was an opportunity for me to work directly with community organizers who would go to schools and teach people about education budgets. And in that era, like 2001-2, budgets were considered a really, I mean, mystical tool only in the purview of education economists at most. And so common people were not very aware of it. So it was a good starting point for me to work directly with community organizers and get in touch with sort of community members and parents. Then I worked on an initiative called Commonwealth Education Fund, which spanned 17 countries of the Commonwealth. And interestingly, as part of that, I made my first visit to Edinburgh in 2003 to attend the Commonwealth Conference of Ministers of Education. And so it's lovely to be back in Edinburgh, even if virtually, organized by Will and his team here. And I mean, and that was also an interesting opportunity. When that grant ended, I ended up in Buckingham Palace meeting the Queen in 2008. So that was an interesting opportunity, even though sadly it was before the era of social media. So I couldn't post it on Instagram and Facebook. And after that work in ActionAid for a couple of years, I moved on to Asia Pacific Education Network called ASBE, where I worked on adult education, on education financing with the member organizations across the Asia Pacific region, which was also quite an interesting work, where I had the role of being both a policy analyst when I used to work with national organizations to analyze their education budgets, but also as an education advocate and campaigner to meet with the policymakers of the region and advocate for increased education financing for marginalized groups. Couple of years down the line, I worked in ActionAid International as their global lead for education program in advocacy, and also working on youth issues based in Thailand. And we had programs in 45 countries around the world. And again, that gave me an opportunity to connect to civil society across a large number of countries and regions. So that's briefly, work-wise, what I have been doing for the past 20 years. And again, considering the audience, I thought I would share a couple of lessons which I found useful moving forward. And happy to discuss further when the open plenary begins. So first of all, what I have found important was to have a clarity of vision for career goals based on an honest assessment of personal strengths and preferences. And some of the choices to think through might be, and again, with the caveat that this is from my very personal experience in the areas of program management, in policy analysis, advocacy, campaigns, and grants management, is to ask oneself, I mean, do I want to work nationally, or do I want to work, let's say, regionally or internationally? Because I have seen colleagues who are incredible workers at national level, but have had difficulty scaling up their experience to regional or global level, when you have to be aware of various national context and be assured that one size fits all work doesn't work everywhere. And similarly, some of the other choices to think through that, do I want to be a, let's say, manager of large teams, or administrator or grant manager, or do I want to be a technical expert zeroing on a specific thematic skill or expertise? Third option in terms of checking in one's personal interest and capacity is that whether I want to be a sectoral expert in, let's say, education, or do I want to be a broader intersectoral expert in, let's say, overall social development or poverty alleviation, things like that. And one important consideration I have found is that whether I want to be stable, a lifetimer in an organization, or do I want a variety of experience, right? Do I want to move from new institutions to new locations? Do I enjoy that? I mean, I chose the variety of experience. So usually I have worked in an organization for around 5 years and then moved on to get new experience. The second option I found useful is, or sort of a second lesson is that to have regular self-critique and reflection on an individual level, professional level, institutional level, and sectoral level. Asking myself every year, am I growing personally and professionally? Have I learned and done something new this year? So if I'm in an organization for 5 years, I'm asking myself, have I done the same thing every year for 5 years? So is it a 1 year of experience repeated, or have I done something or learned something new? And being deliberately provocative, I would want to say that sometimes I have seen colleagues from the education sector be inward looking and have the habit of preaching to the converted. And I have found it consciously, important to deliberately step outside of comfort zone and connect with colleagues across the sectors or across arenas. The third lesson I have found useful is conscious nurturing of values, which can be transferable to skills and convertible to performance. Values like empathy, cultural sensitivity, mutual respect, to be able to communicate to a wide variety of audience clearly and concisely. So I have had the opportunity to interact with from heads of states to Nobel laureates to community mobilizers and parents in rural school. So it's very important to have mutual respect for everyone and be willing to listen to them, but also to communicate clearly what you are bringing across, which is of importance and relevance for them. Fourth lesson has been to stay motivated and inspired by tracking the arc of impact from your work. So I found it easier when I worked nationally and could go visit communities and schools, and it becomes more difficult when you are in a meeting room in Washington, DC, and working for a community in Tanzania. And so, and I can say that meeting high-level policymakers and influencers is wonderful, definitely, to make case for education. But seeing how your work is making a difference on the ground in the lives of children can be incredibly inspirational and can keep you going when you are caught up in, let's say, bureaucratic processes or processes which is not always clear how it's making an impact. Fifth lesson I have found useful is to have a beginner's mind, to have the ability and willingness to learn from others, avoiding intellectual arrogance and sort of avoiding sort of narrow dichotomy of academic versus practitioners, and always keeping up with the developments in the field of academics and practice, both, and learning from both and applying both in your own work. And lastly, I would want to say that, being part of networks of like-minded colleagues and building relationships beyond institutional affiliation has been incredibly useful in my journey across the decades. And having professional mentors along the way, who can guide you and support you in your work, but beyond your work, and having that mentorship going beyond institutional affiliation has also been really important. And lastly, as you move on from a beginner in the field to having some experience, to have the generosity in sharing your own knowledge with others who might be interested, like a panel like this. So I'll just stop here, and I look forward to hearing others and learning from others as well, and chipping in when it's useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tanvir, for getting us started, and I really appreciate your generous heart and nature for this, sharing your own experiences with us. So, Heather, I'd like to invite you up now.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm Heather Simpson. I am the Chief Program Officer at Room to Read. Room to Read envisions a world where all children can pursue a quality education that prepares them to be fulfilled and make positive change in the world, in their own lives, in their own families, communities, in the world. We transform. Our work is focused on helping children secure their right to education and focus on the foundational literacy skills and gender equality as well. I am a member of the management team at Room to Read. There's 5 of us on that executive leadership team. And my job is to I have a team of technical experts who are experts on literacy, on pedagogy, on material development, on book publishing, on library management, as well as a team of experts who are focused on gender equality, so girls' education, life skills, expertise, mentoring. And then I also supervise our team of research monitoring and evaluation technical experts who focus on creating our common indicators, on analyzing our data so that we can keep improving our own interventions, as well as share our insights with the broader community. I love my job. I love my organization. I feel really lucky to have this opportunity to work with really wonderful colleagues. We have worked in 20 countries around the world, so we're a smaller scale to a lot of other organizations who are working in 100 plus countries. And we started our work in Asia and Africa. We also have a little bit of work in Latin America and the Middle East now as well as looking at some new opportunities in Europe and North America. I have been at Room to Read. On Sunday, it'll be my 5th year anniversary. And it's hard to believe that it's been 5 years already. I've been a friend of the organization for about 14 years as a partner, as a someone in the sector. I think one of my main reflections on the international education sort of community is that it is a very small community. There are many different incredible colleagues, and I have the opportunity to meet them at different parts of the world and different meetings and things like that, and therefore it makes the community feel very small and in a very family sort of way. So, and that's one of my main reflections on my own career. I've been working in this sector for about 25 years now in development, and it's that networking and that community which has helped me in my career growth. As an undergraduate, I had an undergraduate degree in anthropology, and I did Peace Corps volunteering work in Honduras right after my undergraduate degree was over. I was focused on hillside agriculture at that stage and really appreciated the opportunity to learn community development. After Peace Corps, I worked at a very small consulting firm that was focused on research monitoring and evaluation in education. And that's how I got my start in the education side of development. And I had a wonderful mentor at that company. We were in an office of 2. We were a satellite office in Washington, D.C., where the headquarters was in Los Angeles. I learned so much from that mentor, and he still is a mentor to me even now, 20 plus years later. After working at that family-run business, I worked at a larger organization, American Institutes for Research, that has most of their focus has domestic US-based work, and they had a small group that was focused on international development. I learned so much there on budgeting, on project management, on proposal writing, which again, I had incredible colleagues there from whom I was learning every day. After American Institutes for Research, I went to Save the Children, which was a bit of the flip, where most of their work was focused on international in many different countries, and they had a very small US domestic portfolio. I was working on the international side of things. It was an incredible, I loved my job at Save the Children, wonderful colleagues, and working at an organization that was so complex and big and multi-sectoral really allowed me to continue expanding my network as well as learning new things. It was really hard for me to leave Save the Children because I did love my job so much. this very unique opportunity to become Chief Program Officer at Room to Read. There aren't very many of these opportunities, and therefore it was probably the hardest decision to leave a job I loved to pursue this. I am glad I did. I don't have regrets, but it was one of those really unique moments in my career where I decided I did want to work at Room to Read. Again, I knew the organization, I knew the colleagues, I knew that there was a really wonderful fit. Again, I loved my job at Save the Children, so that was a hard one to do. A couple reflections. As I mentioned, mentors have been incredibly important in my career journey. I did not have a pre-planned journey for myself. I didn't know I wanted to focus on education until I started that job after Peace Corps. I did a graduate degree while I was working, focused on education. I think that it helped me to keep my mind really open and to say yes to opportunities when they presented themselves to me, and to sort of be, change is not easy for me. So to force myself to change every once in a while has been really important. And then the last sort of reflection I have, and then I'll hand over, but because this community is so small, I think that idea that Tanvir mentioned, respect for all of our colleagues. There have been folks who are entry level in 1 year who then in a couple years later are my donor, are my investor, and knowing that we are part of this broader community, it's been really important to approach every single person with whom I work with respect and with dignity, and to find these interactions to have opportunities to learn, no matter what position people are in a bureaucracy or in an organization, or in a community. I have really appreciated all the learning opportunities I've had from folks. With that, I'll pause.
Excellent. Really appreciate it, Heather. For those of you who just arrived, so we're right now having panelists share their experiences in 7 or 8 minutes, but if you've got questions, please either jot them down or add them to the chat box as we go through, because we'll have a larger question and answer time following this. So Pablo, I'd like to invite you up to share.
Sure, Will, thanks. Hello, everybody. My name is Pablo Fraser. I'm an analyst at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, which is an international governmental organization that conduct social research in multiple areas, and one particular area of attention is education. And within the Education Directorate, I work particularly in the Teacher and Learning International Survey, TALIS, which is the largest survey measuring teachers' practices, their working conditions, their learning environments. And it's a topic that I feel quite personally invested, and it's a fascinating place to work. I mainly deal in TALIS with issues regarding survey implementation, data processing, and analysis as well. And I have been working here since September 2015, so almost 6 years now. And how I got here, well, I think my journey is not that exceptional. I first stumbled with issues related to education when I was finishing my bachelor degree in sociology. I'm Chilean, and it was in Chile at that time. And there was huge social protest going around concerning the education system. So when I finished my career, there was a huge demand in the job market for researchers to work on topics related with education. And I got a job in education faculty to teach future teachers. And that's how I stumbled myself in the fascinating world of teacher preparation. And I became very familiarized with topics regarding teacher agency, teacher's voice, teacher's professional development. The importance and the notion of teacher professionalism was really ingrained in that moment for me. And after working a few years there, I felt the need to improve my skills in this area, and I decided to pursue a PhD to work on certain topics of teachers that I was particularly curious about, in particular issues related with teachers' autonomy. And I decided to go to Penn State, the Pennsylvania State University in the United States, where I met Will. We were classmates. And something very curious happened in Penn State. I was introduced to the role of international organizations, something that I was completely oblivious about. And I was fascinated by it because before that, I always understood education policies as a very local, context-based, focus-based initiative, which I still feel is like that. But then appears this role of international agents that influence the decision of countries or seek to influence the decision of countries. And I was completely fascinated by these agencies. Who are they? What are they seeking? How they interact with countries? How can they help countries? Do they help countries? So I have all these questions on my mind. And to be honest, out of intellectual curiosity, I decided that I would like to work on international organization. And I was fascinated by the work of the OECD because as a student, I knew about the TALI survey, this survey on teachers. So I was super lucky that after I finished my PhD, actually in the same month of my dissertation, there was an opening in the TALIS team at the OECD. It was amazing, to be honest. And I applied and I got the job. I laughed myself because it sounds like winning the lottery, and I certainly felt like that at the moment. And I have been here since then. And what I love about my work is this global dimension. I find it fascinating to learn about the challenges of different countries and how similar can they be. Despite if we're talking about Singapore, or if we're talking about Colombia, or if we're talking about England, certain notions of teachers' professionalism, they share. And it's fascinating to see the similarities. At the same time that you notice certain particularities of the challenge and the approach to policy. But that international dialogue, being in a room with all these countries is, for me, is a very valuable experience. Working with colleagues all over the world, for me, is also very enriching. Hearing different perspectives is something that is fascinating. That's more or less my experience working this. As a recommendation, I think I agree with what my colleagues have said, that you need to know yourself. Where are your skills? What do you like to do? Because to work on an international organization can be different than the work in academia, for example. I think in the work in international organizations, you always have a foot in the more practical, administrative, policy work. It requires you to have certain social skills. It requires to engage respectfully with different cultures, with different agents. And you also have a foot on research as well. So it's important to balance these elements. But at the same time, it's important to note, at least at the OECD, that we are a policy organization in the sense that we are following a policy agenda. And sometimes, although you may have very interesting research questions that can be academically very interesting to pursue, maybe you won't have the space to pursue it in the context of the international organization, because we're following more of like a policy-oriented agenda. So in that sense, I believe that academia has, for lack of a better word, more freedom to explore topics, more freedom to do the type of research interest to pursue. But the trade-off that I feel that there is that without a doubt in my mind, I do think the international organizations has more policy power. I have seen it, that our reports impact policy. I have seen high-level officers discuss our results and consider for reform. So I think there's good points but it all depends what is your interest. What do you like to do? Do you like to engage with countries? Do you like the policy work? Do you like engage in discussions? What areas to prioritize? Or you are a more research-oriented type of person that like to go through literature reviews, define research hypotheses? These are some elements that you need to consider when applying to this job. And I will stop here, and we can follow up later on the discussion. Thanks.
Right. Thanks, Pablo, so much. I actually didn't know all about your background when we talked to Penn State, so it's kind of fun to hear more. So Nihan, I'd like to invite you up to share yours.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Will. Thank you for organizing this seminar and thinking about my experience. So I work as an education economist in European Investment Bank, EIB, for the last 3 years and a half now. I'm based in Luxembourg. For those who are not familiar with EIB, because I was not that familiar with EIB before joining, EIB was established in the late 1950s, basically, to help the least advantaged regions of European Union. And at that time, it was Mezzogiorno, which was the south of Italy. And EIB is the lending arm of European Union. It's a project-based institution, so it's not really involved in policy making, but it's mostly a policy taker institution. It's investing, so it's financing many sectors, so it's a multi-sectoral organization. And one of the interests is on education and public research, which is the name of the division I work for. So basically, we work in mostly in Europe, in European member states, in investing education infrastructure. And more and more outside the European Union, mostly Western Balkans. In my portfolio, I can have countries like Serbia, like Montenegro, like Kosovo, and also in the southern neighborhood that encompasses countries like Morocco or Tunisia. So basically what an education economist does in this kind of structure is when governments come with a request for financing, is to look at if this project makes sense from an education point of view, if it fits into the national education landscape or strategy, if the demographics call for such infrastructure change, especially within European member states. If we are outside, operating outside European Union, which kind of grants can we mobilize so that this investment in infrastructure can also be accompanied by investments in teacher training? So just to give you a concrete example, a recent project that I led was investing in digital infrastructure in Serbia, but while also financing teacher training so that this digital equipment and infrastructure can be used most efficiently. I must say it's quite different from what I've been doing so far, but I feel fairly happy with my job and with the team I'm working with. And I like especially this diversity of the teams that we are having. As I mentioned, we are an infrastructure investment bank. which leads us to work with architects, with engineers, and try to understand actually aspects of education infrastructure that I never thought of. So it's a continuous learning experience, and it's also very much hands-on experience. So it's very much project-based and going to ministries. So interacting with, of course, with ministries, but interacting also with school heads, because you need to listen to them and to understand actually what make them more comfortable in their school, or to listen to teachers how they can use more effectively, or what they need to use more effectively these learning spaces. So as I said, it's very much of a project-based approach, but it's the first time that I'm in such a hands-on experience, I must say. Before coming here, I'm from a background, I'm an economist. I'm originally from Turkey, so I did my bachelor's study at the University of Galatasaray, which is a public French-speaking university. And at that moment, I didn't have a plan to work on education until I left Turkey and I started my master's degree in development economics. And at that moment, I started to get interested not only in children's education, but also more on children's well-being. So I started to work on child labor and forced displacement in the context of Turkey. Obviously, child labor and education have a lot of linkages. And this was a decisive moment because it started to draw a bit my career at the United Nations. Then I started an internship by contacting randomly an officer, a statistician, sending my CV and trying to present my case. And I got this internship really by, it was a lottery, I think Pablo was saying. I moved to Geneva, working on statistics on child labor, manipulating large-scale data, household data, etc. And after 6 months, I moved to Rome to a family-run project, I must say, research project, and financed by World Bank, UNICEF, and International Labour Organization. It was, I'm saying it, very family-run because the coordinator of this project was an Italian of 60 years old and very, he was my mentor, I must say, because it's with him that I started to analyze thoroughly things, and I started to produce reports that can be said well written and published. I learned to negotiate actually with many counterparts. I learned how to establish dialogue with many ministries. So that experience was quite important for me. It was called Understanding Children's Work. Unfortunately, now it's closed because of lack of resources, financial resources. But I had substantial experience there, about 4 years working on child labor, education, youth employment, and even running the first survey on begging children in Dakar. So it was very remarkable. And I think it was Hitler saying that, okay, it was very difficult to leave this experience. And it was my case, one of the toughest decisions to take. But I had to go back to Turkey for a couple of years at that time to work for civil society. And there happened my transition to education. And running again research projects on vocational education and training in Turkey, on primary and secondary education in Turkey. So many different aspects of education. And there I was settled really in the education field, I must say. And one day, a friend of mine with whom I worked at Rome told me that there was a job opening in UNESCO's Global Education Monitoring Report. It was 8 years ago now. And she said, okay, exactly your profile, I think you should apply for. And which I did. And then I got the job, basically. I remember the day I got the job. So, and then I went to Paris and I stayed there with Global Education Monitoring, where I met Will for 5 years, analyzing data, monitoring EFA goals, and then SDGs. And indicators, and working on approximately 4 to 5 reports, if I must I recall well. And then I again applied for another job, and I found this job at the European Investment Bank, where I explained briefly what I'm doing. So just to complement a lot of what has been said before, I think my experience shows that the professional mentors or managers, but some managers are not necessarily mentors, and mentors are not necessarily managers sometimes. But I think they played quite an important role for me. So this experience that I had in Rome, and then the experience I had in Paris together with Aaron Benevot, I think it's also worth mentioning, because this is the way that you are feeling encouraged, and you are being actually given more autonomy, especially when you are a bit at the beginning of your career. So it's very important to have this support. And then, yes, you need to a bit know what you want, and you need to actually know how much sometimes you need to value different experiences and different interactions through the journey. So you need to value the interaction, and you need to be able to interact with the Ministry of Education, with a Minister of Education. And sometimes in my current job, I can go and it should be the Prime Minister who welcomes. So you have this kind of interactions, but sometimes also you go, and this is where the most exciting part of my job is to go to the school and to meet school heads and teachers and sometimes students, and to discuss with them. So you have this very different experiences and interactions. And of course, you need to combine different skills. I know it was said before. So you need to have a bit of analytical skills, of course. You need to have your diplomatic skills. You need to have communication skills. You need to have negotiation skills in my current job, which is very much on these aspects as well. So you need to combine very different skills. And I think it was Tanvir who mentioned this stable or variety. So I have, in my current organization, I have colleagues who've been here for the last 25 years, which is good because they are happy. Or you want a more variety in your professional career, staying 5 years and then moving on and changing and getting adapted to a new environment. And lastly, I must say the thing that I learned a lot, it was that wherever you do and wherever institutions you are, is that you need to keep this passion and this motivation for education, because otherwise you feel this joy to come to work and also to transmit your knowledge and experiences. So that's all from my side. Over to you, Will. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nihan. So quite a variety of experiences so far from everyone. Boaz, I'd like to invite you up. I know you've got some slides, so if you want, just tell me when I need to move to the next one for you.
Thank you, Will. And maybe I think because the slides will really be long, so I would rather the approach I'm taking now is a summary, so that I would be able to connect even the first with the last, because that would be helpful. Thanks to the colleagues who have already spoken. As you've been told, my name is Boaz Waruku. Currently, I am the program manager for a continental network in Africa called ANSEFA. The long form of it is that it's Africa Network Campaign on Education for All. The network basically is an education rights movement, part of the global movement for education, which, if you are aware, then it's coordinated globally by the Global Campaign for Education. In Africa, ANSEFA being the regional network, it works with and coordinates the actions in 38 countries, where in each of those countries, we have national education coalitions. And each of those coalitions have got a significant components in there. They're starting with at the very core, actually, we have the unions. Those are the education workers, including teachers, non-teaching, and all those who are involved in just making education work in the countries. We also have the component of the media or the journalists who report on education work. We also have researchers and the academia then who come also to help ensure that whatever actions are taken, the advocacy campaign work is informed by evidence, so the research component. And of course, we have the children rights activists, the human rights activists, those who constantly challenge status quo, the bad situations that we find most of the children or communities in. And so that component of the activists really bring a lot more vigor, a lot more focus, and some push or agitation to realize change in education. So principally as a network within a continent and working within the countries, our first and foremost priority is ensuring that public education systems work. In fact, we look at it within the context of what negotiations have even gone on between governments and ourselves as civil society, so that by the time that a framework is reached, then that is a framework that we popularize. We ensure that it is known and owned by the publics. For instance, the Education for All agenda, that framework based on, for example, the Dhaka Framework of Action of 2000, we ensured that that was popularized, and then the publics in the various countries where we are working, they get to know and then own it, so that they are the ones constantly asking the questions of why is this not really working. They keep the government on their toes, because they are actually supposed to be the service providers, because the taxpayers have already made the funds available. It is their responsibility to do so. And we also find that it is important to focus on most of the hardest to reach communities. We in Africa, for example, most of the countries we are talking about, even in my own country, Kenya, where I'm based, you'll find that the nomadic community, those who keep on moving. So getting really to support the system that would enable them have that education is not very easy. So innovative approaches and how to support governments when they do right, but also how to open up a situation which they are not addressing, so that they get to really take some action. And so we do use a number of approaches in ensuring that first, we have quality education. Two, we have the quality provided within a public education system. And that is also supported by a motivated workforce. We're talking of teachers and other workers. That also has got inclusion, that nobody is actually being left at the sides. So a lot of that then hinges on research. And so I ask myself, the work that I do is helping to coordinate a lot, all that and a lot more, ensuring that we have good networks, new partnerships that then would help in supporting the work that we do. Part of also what I do is just the advocacy work, voicing the issues, the concerns, reminding the governments when they have fallen short on commitments they have made, and the lead research or action research that is done, which leads to certain campaigns. Like for now, we are dealing with the campaign on financing, because COVID came, more or less, most governments assumed that the first response is security and health, and then education somehow gets lost. So it is our responsibility to reactivate and reprioritize, refocus attention to education as a very key important thing. So constantly engaging in that kind of a way is part of the work that I do. And for me to arrive at the continental level where I coordinate this kind of work, it started far much behind when I was still an undergraduate student. Actually, my first year, the university, that was Egerton University, coincided with the transition from publicly funded higher education to, I would say, sponsorship or partially funded higher education by the government, and then the students and the parents had to pay. So introduction of fees in higher education. And you see, this was really a challenge because that transition in itself, it brings a lot of inequalities. You find at the time, most of the students who are arriving in those public universities were students from very, very meager, low economic backgrounds. So when you tell them you have to pay and you're actually about to chase them away, you're telling them if you can't pay, you can't stay. You are basically sending everybody home. So that is how, for me, my advocacy began, because we started by saying, where do you want them to go? And who is occupying the spaces that they were called to really occupy? And what can't you get alternative mechanisms of ensuring that these students who are here learn to the end, including the scheme which they then introduced, Higher Education Loans Board, to finance part of the education. And at the time also, the environment, the learning environment in the universities was actually so restrictive. So the academic freedom that you'll talk about, you'll find teachers, particularly those who are in the arts departments, those who teaching philosophy, sociology, and all that. These are people who are in class and they are intelligence officers masquerading as students there and informing on them. And so they are really being attacked on the basis of material they have delivered. So we started saying there must be a little more of freedom here. And I found myself then in the student activism, student leadership. And before I realized, I started networking with other actors who are outside of the university, because at the time, the civil society was very vocal. Out there, people who had been struggling to ensure that there was a little bit more of an opening of the political space, because Kenya, if you remember at the time, we had just gone through a single party era, and a multi-party system had just been reintroduced in 1992. And here we are joining the university in 93. So the environment is still not used to that kind of multiplicity of ideas and engaging more robustly. So by the time then I find those agitating outside and colleagues, we are trying to network other universities so that we form also an umbrella body that can agitate for academic freedom and ensure that students are in school, they're supported, and they learn to the full level. From there, I found myself with other civil society talking about really the rights to education. That is how then Elimu to the National Education Coalition in Kenya was formed. I found myself part of that team. I also found myself within the constitutional reform movement, and the core of it was how do we ensure these rights are protected. And so the Basic Rights Campaign, I found myself in those. And I would say that some of these were engagements not for monetary gain, because there were no payments for the work that one does. The only thing that then you'll find is teams that are in place, like there are a number of international organizations that were also very helpful, including ActionAid, including Save the Children. And some of these organizations and bodies linked to the unions that were available could really support some of the work. So that agitation, I found myself then being engaged in, let's say, developing frameworks that then would inform debate and negotiations. That is how come some of the first products we had was the Basic Rights Charter, defining our rights in its fulsomeness and demanding that they be recognized and appreciated as such. I'm very happy that by 2010, when the new Kenyan constitution was adopted, part of the Basic Rights Charter and all those components that you were dealing with were really found to fit. And indeed, I think many people do agree that the Kenyan Constitution, Chapter 4, significantly captures basic rights or the fundamental rights and freedoms, which should really be protected.
Well, I'm sorry to cut you off. About 1 more minute to wrap things up. I want to make sure we get to Alexandra. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, sir. And I think maybe the component that I would also engage or indicate is the fact that when dealing with the advocacy matters, particularly I think the focus that I've been exposed to more in education, it's largely been about ensuring that other rights are also not left behind. So the interlinkages between the education that we do, I think that becomes critical. But there are key lessons which one can quickly just bring out from the experiences I've had. One of them is every work that you want to do and you want to do it well, it starts with a passion. The knowledge that you get, the skills, and just the push, the constant urge to keep going is because then you are pushed or driven by that passion. And indeed, I think job opportunities will always be there. But for my case, even the first jobs that I landed was not because I was looking for a job. I was doing some work, and then I was told, now for this, I think we need to be giving some compensation to enable you continue. The intergenerational equity, I also realized that a number of times, the segments of the society that initiate processes then get others or leave others behind without knowing that the knowledge levels are not at par. So the intergenerational equity would include, I think part of it I'll call the mentorship, where those who've been there, they keep inducting new ones and they continue moving forward. But there's also the element of the theory that are also taught at the universities and the practice in the communities. Experience that I had through the constitutional reform movement, community organizing as a strong and a very powerful tool that enables one even to deal with those who are not able to read and write, the illiterate. It's very powerful. It enables you also to understand lots of the challenges that they face, and they appreciate when you really get down to help in a significant way. So maybe because there'll be space for further discussions and all that, I think I'd only leave it at that. And sorry for taking a little bit longer time than was assigned. Thank you, Will.
No problem. Thanks, Boaz, for sharing. It's interesting seeing some of your work starting with really student advocacy pieces at the university. So very cool. Thanks for sharing. Alexandra, I'd like to invite you up.
And let me thank you for making me part of this. I think it's a remarkable initiative, and I'm really proud to be here to share with you and the people who are with us in the room. So I'll just start by saying that the backbone really of my interest has always been public policy. And so that comes back to what most of you are interested in to some degree, some more tangentially than others. And I'm particularly interested in unintended consequences, or what the French call, which I love the term, perverse effects of decisions that seem like good ones at the time, but that rolled out over 20 years have different effects than what we imagined. So that's the kind of red thread through my work. I joined UNESCO in 1972, so I spent a long career at UNESCO, but now I've had 15 years since retirement, and I've done some very different things. At UNESCO, I was basically, for the first 15 years or so, I was an editor in various capacities. First, assistant editor of a periodical, a quarterly called Prospects. It still exists. I got there for the first issue. Then editor of books and a compendium concerning study abroad and those sorts of things. And then in the early 90s, UNESCO created something called the Commission on Education for the 21st Century. The UN has these various commissions, and the chair of that commission was Jacques Delors. He was at the time the president of the European Commission. And I was the executive secretary, and that was a thrilling 10 years. It was really fun. The final report was called Learning the Treasure Within. It was translated into 30 languages, and it, you know, looking back, there are many, many things that one would have wished one could have done differently, but it certainly made a mark, and it started some conversations in countries about the future of education. And my last important job at UNESCO was coordinating UNESCO's response to the HIV and AIDS prevention effort, and that was very, very different from what I'd done before, but it was absolutely fabulous. My career at UNESCO was like a lifelong learning experience. I felt like I was paid to learn a substantial part of the time there, learning to work with other people, learning to deal with colliding truths that you sit in a room and you have 4 or 5 people from different cultures, and we all have a truth that we are very attached to, and they are not compatible in any way, and you have to find a way forward. And I always found that very exciting and just a wonderful way of learning constantly. One of the observations I had, and this is particular to the UN, not so much from what I hear from what you people are saying, is that subject matter expertise is a dominant requirement for being recruited. But then you have to broaden out your skill set, and you have to let go with some of the focus on the specific subject matter expertise in order to navigate complex rules and systems, in order to navigate complexity in general, in order to do management things and things that are not related to what one does in an academic career or what one does in a more in-depth career, I would say. I found it always challenging and fulfilling. I didn't like my work every single day. I don't think anybody ever does. And I think that there are some downsides, certainly, to working in big international bureaucracies. And one is the real difficulty of assessing results and impact. When you're working on a smaller scale project, it's perhaps easier. When you're working for a big organization that you know, has ideals like UNESCO has, it's a little bit difficult to figure out exactly what you've achieved in a week or a month or even over a career. And for some people, that's incredibly frustrating. For me, not so much, but as you grow over time, you realize that incremental change is, you know, pretty good achievement. So that's kind of the downside. And I did see colleagues who became frustrated with the bureaucracy, who became frustrated with the lack of immediate results. And so there are temperamental questions also about working in these big organizations. And lastly, because it's something that I lived through in my career at UNESCO, we were always accused of being political. Well, politics is part of every big organization that I know about. And it's not the nicest part of the work, but it's part of it. And if you try to go around it or avoid it or think you can ignore it, you're going to be more unhappy than if you just deal with it as part of the landscape. Over the last 15 years, I've did consulting in a variety of areas, and again, related to public policy. And as Will knows, I'm very, very interested in and concerned by the intrusion of the public sector into public policy. And it's a concern of mine and something that I work on and write about. So that's really about it. And thanks so much for having me.
Excellent. Thanks, Alexandra. So we have quite a variety of experiences here. I remember talking to Alexandra about her UNESCO experiences when I was there. She's got a wealth of knowledge with her time there. Some panelists that really started obviously on an education track and some that might have stumbled across it. So I want to open it up now for our audience members to ask really any question. They can be addressed to a specific panelist, or it can be very broad. So questions from the audience. This is a unique opportunity to really talk to individuals from very different pieces. Once again, you can ask a question by adding it to the chat box or raising your hand. Both of those you'll find at the top of your screen. Okay. So I'm going to try to see if we can do a couple of questions at a time. So Christina, thanks for yours. We'll see if there's a couple other questions. Okay. Okay, so let's start. I've got Nimisha. You've got your hand raised. Can you unmute yourself and ask a question for us? And we'll take 3 and then allow the panelists to respond.
Well, hi, everyone. I am dialing in from Penn State. So we are Penn State, Pablo. I was just curious. I have a very diverse background, and I think like coming into education, you can come from pretty much any field. So I was just curious, like, what were your journeys like in your undergrad years, and was there like a set path that you figured it out, or it was just more like zigzagging through it? I think I was just very interested in that aspect, because I think this is an era of specialization, but it seemed like you all came from very different backgrounds. So I'm just wondering, like, how does somebody make a path into international development and just education in general?
Okay. So let's take a couple more. So Christina Grace Smith, I see you've got a question there. Do you want to unmute yourself and share?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I don't have my camera on, unfortunately, but I am a master's student at the University of Maryland, and I don't know why it's showing my middle name. That's very odd, but I'm just curious at this point if it's more important to focus. You mentioned a lot of different areas, developing these analytical skills, developing diplomatic skills, becoming an expert in a content area, becoming an expert in technical skills, learning policy, learning advocacy. As somebody who's mid-20s, early career, it all feels a little overwhelming at the moment. And so I guess my question to all of you is, would it be better at this point to just kind of dabble in all of those a little bit? Or do you recommend becoming more, focusing in on 1 or 2 so that we can be really solid and marketable in that particular area?
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Christina. Rona Brown? I see you've got a question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, welcome.
Hi, yeah, I'm kind of the opposite of Christina. I've been working for quite a long time before I came very late to my PhD, and really enjoyed what some people had talked about earlier, that immediate impact of the work you're doing in kind of education interventions and program management. But I'm now really enjoying the more kind of creative, qualitative research that I'm doing, and I'm wondering, in the organizations that the speakers are familiar with, how do they see the different routes to kind of evidence bases that are produced through monitoring and evaluation or through research? Like where are the main evidence bases that they see being drawn on? Yeah, and just that relationship between kind of research and monitoring and evaluation, and how they kind of play together.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Anna. So I want to open this up to the panel. I want to get through at least one more round of questions. So you don't need to address all of these, but we've got questions on kind of education specific, or is there a more winding career path? Some on, do we need to have a broad spectrum, or should we have specific skills that are really essential? And then Rona's piece on what evidence are we really drawing from in these. So Alexandra, you want to get started? And
I need to just say a few words about the evidence base. I think that certainly in big international organizations, and I have experience with UNICEF, and I have experience with some of the Washington Beltway Bandits and UNESCO, and also UNAIDS, is that so often, even very senior people, you really want to say to them, what problem is it you're trying to solve? Because so many programs start out with a solution and then identify a problem. And so I think your question about building the evidence base is really, really important, because the constraints of spending money, of funders, of timeframes, and so forth can push us in the directions of finding a solution and then looking around for the evidence. And so I would consider it more as a sort of life's work to make sure that you're focusing on building the evidence base rather than providing you with a solution. That's how I would say it. And just to conclude with that, the people I saw that I most admired in my work were always asking themselves questions and always looking for someone who knew more than they did about a problem. So thank you.
Excellent, Alexandra. Others on the panel want to address one of the three questions that were just asked?
I think this question around focus or breadth is a really good one. And I think that it sort of depends on the person and your opportunities as well. There are so many different career paths in international education. You can focus on operations, you can be a project manager, you can be a budget manager, you can be an accountant, you can also be a technician who's focused on teacher professional development or publishing. There's just so many different things. And I found for myself, I started with a focus on research, monitoring, and evaluation just because that was my first opportunity. And it gave me a really good platform to learn about a lot of different things. My next opportunity was focused on budget management and proposal development. So for me, it was really choosing the people I wanted to work with and learn from, and it sort of opened up my breadth. That said, I am not the technical expert on my team on pedagogy and on professional development. So I have that expertise of somebody who has focused his career on that. So I think you can go either way. I'm guessing that's not a very satisfying answer, but that's the best I can do.
Excellent. Thanks, Heather. Boaz, you want to come in and answer one of these? Boaz, if you're talking, you're muted still.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I think thanks for the questions. And Christina, because I think that is where Heather ended, it is important, yes, to get basic skills in a number of areas, particularly when you are in policy work, doing advocacy and all that. Of course, some negotiation skills, research skills. I mean, because you are not really getting to the detailed academic research that would just be done for a lot more time. But there's a way in which at some point you just want to understand why a situation is the way it is. And you can use various tools. So just the very basic skills that would enable you to gather that would be sufficient. And indeed, where inadequacy is, do networking, because there are a lot more organizations really exist that can also support their work. Also, don't struggle to be the jack of all trades, that you must be very skilled in each and all of that, because in that case, then you really first not even get the time, and you'll not be so detailed on certain aspects. So you can have basic skills across board, but your specialization, so that when it comes to it's a policy negotiation or analysis on what could be the options, and that is where you are good at. But I'd also add, linked to what Nimsha actually asked, whether you can, just the zigzag way of landing into education, it would be more better actually to go and study education, because by doing that, you get the depth of knowledge that is required. Because some of us, like I did a Bachelor of Science in Food and Technology, had the very basic. There is the advocacy that now drove me to go and do public policy and administration, and then project planning and monitoring. You are now trying to see, oh, what am I missing, which I require a little bit of more skills in. But if you started with education, because I found myself, say, inducting teachers on a new curriculum, which is more broad-based, including the materials we were using for a new constitutional change. But for you to deliver that, you require some methodology. How do you deliver it? How is it done? And how do you even communicate? Because the communication aspect, you'll also find that that could be missing. If you do not have the skills around that, you can also rely on some of the team members to help you develop it. But it is more advisable to really get to the education. If you are somebody within the education sector, get to the depth of it, imbibe as much knowledge about it as you can, because it will help you. It will make things a little bit more easier, even when doing your plan for the education work, for the research work that you want to do. That is what I would put across. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Boaz. Pablo?
Thanks, Will. So I want to complement the questions about developing skills, and I empathize with this type of questions because not so long ago, well, maybe some time ago, I was also in the same position of being a young professional and thinking what I need to develop. And I remember that anxiety. I remember, for example, this pressure of developing quantitative skills, because we had this perception that doing quantitative analysis will open more doors. And of course, there's some truth to that. But I think in order to relax a little bit more the aspect, my recommendations are three on this aspect. First, I completely agree with what Heather said, that there are multiple paths to enter to international organization. My recommendation is that don't lose track of what you like to do, and try to get better and better in that you like to do, because this is a tough job. If you're getting involved in something that you don't feel the passion to do, or you don't want to learn about that, constantly learning that, you're not going to be able to keep up. So it's important that perfect yourself in that area of skills or that topic that you feel really motivated. And if you develop yourself in that, you will find a doorway to enter in that organization. Second, I think more than thinking about concrete skills, it's important to think about soft skills, flexibility, willingness to be constantly learning, your adaptability. We are going through constant changes in every aspect of our work. So more than concrete set of knowledge that maybe in 5 years from now will not be useful, what we need to develop is a disposition to be willing to constantly learn. I developed my quantitative skills to a high level, and when I did my test to enter to the OECD, I was evaluated on those skills, and I have not used them since then. Most of my work has been logistical work, management work, and I had to adapt, and I love what I'm doing now. But I think that mentality is something important. And the third aspect, please keep in mind, an important part of your learning is done in your work. We can think about doing master's degrees and small courses, and this, of course, is important, but the amount of things that you learn in your work is astonishing. So you also have to think about that. So I'm telling you this to reduce a little bit the anxiety that you might be experiencing at this moment. So I hope this was helpful.
Thanks, Pablo. Nihan, let's go to you, and then we'll take one more round of questions.
Yes, but I think Pablo translated a bit what I wanted to say is that it's true that 10, 15 years ago, I think we had the same anxiety. But as previous colleagues said, I think there are many pathways. I mean, I went through the acquiring quantitative skills to having qualitative methods, and then now having a managerial job. So I think you have many different pathways to take actually, and it's not constant. I mean, it doesn't mean that today you are being a very technical person, that tomorrow you will be able also to change and to adapt yourself to being a more operational person, or from going from a quantitative person to a qualitative person. Just I wanted to compliment on this. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Nihan. Really appreciate it. We're going to take one last round of questions. I know some people may need to leave because we're getting towards the end of time. So if that's the case, please feel free to jump off. If that is the case for our panelists, I want to thank everybody for being here. You've been amazing. We will share out this recording later with everyone. But if you are able to hang around, let's do one last round. And so some of these I think have been addressed, so I will try to skip to those that haven't. Sam, Hop, do you want to come in and just share where you're from and your question?
Sure. Can you all hear me? My mute button was looking very strange.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, thanks a lot. Hey, great, really insightful presentations today. Thank you so much, everybody on the panel, and Will for putting this together. So my question is basically for somebody who is further along in their career, and if you see in the chat there, I've got a number of decades with a number of different industries and backgrounds, a number of different degrees, and a recent PhD graduate in CIE. Are there attributes at this stage that are really important or more important for getting some traction in this process to become part of one of your organizations? Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Sam.
Sure.
So Zarina, San Jose, do you want to come and share your question?
Hi. Sorry about that.
Okay. All right, try that now.
Hello. Okay. Sorry again. Yeah, no, I was just wondering because oftentimes in a lot of, especially in big organizations, there will be times when people disagree on certain language or policy pushes that the organization will have. And so I was wondering if this has happened to any of our panelists, and how do these things get resolved within the organization? Yeah, my name is Zarina. I'm currently studying global education policy here at University of Glasgow. Thank you.
Thanks, Zarina. Jose, Rihanna Hurtado. Are you here still? Okay. So, Jose, are you there?
I cannot. Hi, I'm somebody who is with Jose. I'm Marisol. Okay. Sorry, but I was just wondering if some of you could share your experience, like with how the challenges you have had changed since you began to have, a professional life, because I guess when you left university or, your master, and since you have worked for so many years in international organizations or regional organizations, if you could share how much the changes in the labor market, particularly all the technology-related ones, have affected your career and your work, and how you have catched up with that. Thank you.
Okay. So, Danny, I see you've got a specific question to Heather. So
it can be answered by anyone.
Okay.
I noticed, like, as Heather went through her experiences, they were mostly US based, which is where I plan to return to after my master's. So.
Do you want to articulate your question?
Yeah, sure. So, working in international development and education, it often implies that you will be going abroad for your work most of the time, especially if you work for an international agency that is not based in Washington, or a city in the US or the UK. So have you found that, correct me if I'm wrong, most of your experience has been US based, but international facing. Have you found that that has prevented you from certain opportunities? Was that a personal choice that that you chose for your career path, or did you just find great opportunities domestically?
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Danny. So I know we are officially out of time here, but I want to give the opportunity for the panelists to respond to some of these. We have questions on more experienced individuals trying to transition into the field and some of the challenges with that, disagreements over policy, how do we adapt our skills and maybe our focus to the changing labor market, and is that supported by international organizations, and then this piece on international work or international facing work from Danny. So I'd like to invite our panelists to share answering any or multiple of these, as well as any final words you have, and then I'll wrap this up.
Well,
so
could
Tanvir?
I just,
yeah,
sorry. Just because I have to hop off, I'm so sorry. Thanks for this great panel. To Danny's question, yes, most of my work after I spent 3 years in Honduras has been based in the United States. A lot of international travel was built into that. So I spent months and months away from home at different moments, but didn't officially live abroad. That was a personal choice because I'm a stepmother and my stepdaughters are here in the DC area, so I didn't want to sort of break up our family. And it meant that I didn't go after certain opportunities that could have taken our family to other countries. But I was still able to find pathways that were really interesting to my own personal career. Thank you so much for a great panel.
So thanks, Heather. Thanks for sharing. It was great seeing you. All right.
Can I come in? Well,
yeah, Tanvir?
Yeah, okay. Again, running out of time, but I think there were a couple of quite interesting questions in terms of how do you capitalize on a broad base of experience coming into the sector. And I think in that case, it's a pretty standard idea to promote when you're applying is that what you bring into the mix, which is relevant for the job, but also to emphasize that you are willing to learn whatever is needed for that job. So it's about giving an impression of bringing in a lot of experience, the relevance of it, and importance of your ability to adapt to the requirement of the job. That would be one thing. Secondly, about Zarina's point about resolving policy language challenges, and that happens all the time in multi-stakeholder organizations or when you are membership based. And I'm sure that Alexandra has a lot of experience from UNESCO, but from Global Partnership for Education, I can say that we have got stakeholders vying for policy language coming from different constituencies like governments, bilaterals, multilaterals, private sector, civil society. And it's not always easy to resolve it. And at the end, sadly enough, sometimes you have to settle for sort of lowest common denominator, which tries to satisfy everyone, but may not be as cutting edge or as sort of, radical as you would want it to be. And lastly, I think Ardon I think another student has had a question about capacity building, and it's a mixed approach in international organizations. If you're an entry-level employee, they would provide you a lot of training in a way, but sometimes when you are in a senior level, they expect you to bring in with that capacity or sort of learn on your own. So for example, in my case, after I started my journey in this development sector, I realized that I don't have formal training in development. So I went ahead and studied for a master's degree in development to bring in a bit of an academic rigor and sort of theoretical understanding, which I could apply in my practice at my work. So it's a bit of a mix. And as I said, even in my talk, that you always have to be on top of in the evolving labor market. So for example, with the pandemic situation, there is a lot of interest and sort of need for edutech, which helps with remote-based learning. So if you are becoming an expert in edutech in terms of technology, in terms of pedagogy, or in terms of its management, that will come in handy going forward. So it's about keeping track, keeping on top of the trends and patterns, and see what sort of capacity building you can provide by yourself, by external providers, or even through the organizational opportunities that you might have. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Tanvir. Pablo?
Thanks, Will. Yes, I wanted to respond to the questions about discrepancies on language, policy language, on ideas or conclusions. And Tanvir already mentioned the discrepancies that you may have across different stakeholders, and you settle down by the common denominator, which is something that occurs also in the studies that the OECD does with countries. But I would also like to highlight the situations where you may have discrepancy of ideas with your colleagues as well. That happens often. Difference in opinions regarding how to interpret certain data, what are the implications of some of the results, or what are the type of recommendations, or what to present to the countries as a highlight. And it's always very respectful. My experience has always been that you are given opportunity to provide your voice to reason, and they always a manager or a senior manager has a different idea. There's always an argument articulating, but, and this is again the big difference with academia, we are a hierarchical organization and we are a policy organization, in the sense that is some of your findings or results or your interpretation are not quite aligned to what is considered to be the main policy or the agenda or the policy agenda. That aspect may be pushed aside, and it's fine. It's part of the work. It's part of the policy work. It's part of the compromise working with a hierarchical policy institution. But you learn to, it's part of the aspects of the work, but I think it's always done in a very respectful manner. It's just something that you learn to deal with. And to the questions about how have you been able to grow in the organization, the changes, and how technology has threatened certain positions, I would just like to say that what I have seen is a more emphasis in the selection process on the ability, on the creativity of the people getting to the work. If I can simplify this, previously there was an emphasis on what are the skills of the individual. It was someone that can draft a report to do the analysis. And now I see a stronger emphasis on what are the ideas of the individual. What is this individual in terms of creativity? So I'm seeing there is a stronger emphasis in the selection process for those areas that cannot be imitated by artificial intelligence. So yeah, so that's my contribution to those questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Pablo. Boaz?
Yeah, thank you. I think I'll pick up on the Zarina's question. We're talking about the disagreement on the policy language. I'll add another component that it is not just on the policy language alone, but also even on strategy. So I hope that I should accommodate that. And I think Tanvir has really done justice to the policy language and all. On the strategy, I would emphasize the element of the context of the countries or the situation, because for us, like in Africa, no two countries are the same in terms of a policy environment and even how you can do advocacy work. So you must be very, very clear on how, what kind of strategies you can deploy. And that's why even when we encourage the formation of coalitions, the coalitions are formed by various actors that look at issues from a wide spectrum, so that all these parties or actors are actually within the coalition. And I think all of us know the good cop, bad cop kind of an approach, even to engagement and negotiations. Some of those can also be deployed really to get your way in terms of strategy and tactics. And also, part of, I think Jose is the one who was asking about the challenges. The challenges also, I would refer to the dynamics in our countries. There are some countries where, for instance, a budget policy document or a budget itself is an open book. But in some countries, it is a private document of the president or a prime minister. And so when you are doing, for example, now your campaign work or advocacy work is within that area, you'll find a little bit more difficulties in areas where it's considered really a private matter, that anybody talking about it is seen as a threat. So in that case, then the diplomacy or the diplomatic approach that we do advise and that the members do have, and I think this has also largely now been strengthened by the arrival of the GP, the Global Partnership for Education, and the approach in ensuring that we have local education groups. So the multiplicity of actors there, you'll find those will be able to get certain information much easier than the others. So you deploy all your capacities or the strengths that you have. And we've seen this really work. Otherwise, I am very happy and I thank you really for having granted us this opportunity to share our experiences.
Excellent. Thank you, Boaz. Nihan or Alexandra, do you want to either answer your question or share your final thoughts?
I think the question on disagreement is quite interesting, and it happens quite often. Like Alexandra mentioned on UNESCO, but I must mention the same thing for EIB because it's very hierarchical. And at the end, some of the decisions that you receive, or some of the policy decisions, is coming from your hierarchy. And the way it's being solved, sometimes it can be frustrating because you need to find this compromise, or you need to agree on a, on a solution that is not your favorite solution. But yes, this is the reality, and you have. We need to do it's a part of the package, let's say. But sometimes with good argumentations, then you can have. I mean, it's not always that you are having these frustrating situations, but sometimes it can lead to. But sometimes it can be that your sectoral expertise, like education, can convince or can make the decision a bit more comforting for yourself. Thank you very much, Will, for inviting us. I think I need to leave, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Nihan, for joining us. Alexandra, are you still around? Would you like to have a final word?
Well, the final word, I don't know, but this resonates with me so much, and it goes back to what I was talking about colliding truths, which is an expression that I use a lot for myself. And that is the great learning process, that you sit down with people and you are convinced that you have a truth, but they also are convinced they have a truth. And when you can see it that way, and when you can analyze it that way and empathize enough to know where the other one is coming from, then you will accept that sometimes you'll win the argument and sometimes you won't. And sometimes it'll turn out that actually you weren't right to start with. And so that's the enriching part, I think, of the working in an international environment. And that is that business of having to walk in other people's shoes every single day. Thank you.
Thanks, Alexandra. Pablo, is that a residual hand, or is that something new that you'd like to input quickly?
It's a residual hand, Will. Sorry for that.
Okay, no problem. All right, so I want to do a couple things. First, just a reminder that this is the first of two panels. So if you are here and you haven't registered for the second panel and are interested in joining, that panel has obviously 6 different experts coming in, and I've realized as I was introducing these experts that the second panel tends to have some younger, earlier career researchers. We have a lot of experience on this panel. And finally, I want to really thank our panelists for joining us today. Really appreciate you spending time with us, sharing your experiences and your tips on how to get into education and development as a broad field. I also want to thank the event planning team, so Linji, Chuyi, Yongyao, Vivi, and Chun, for helping put this together and helping manage the chat box as we go through. And finally, if you want to know more about what we're doing here at the University of Edinburgh, please follow along with us on Twitter, check out our research group, and we'll be sharing other events in the future. So thank you all for joining us today. Really appreciate it. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks very
everybody.
much.
Thank you all. Thanks for the invitation.
Thanks all, and bye.